I never thought my life would split into a before and after so abruptly, but I guess that's how betrayal works. My name is Ryan Thompson. I'm 25, and until a few weeks ago, I believed I understood love, loyalty, and trust. I was living in a small coastal town where the ocean smells like salt and secrets, and everyone knows your business before you do. Emily Carter, my girlfriend of 2 years, was my supposed partner in this quiet little life. We talked about the future, about moving out of this town, about traveling, about being happy. Everything felt steady, comfortable in the familiar way that made you blind to the cracks. It was late one Sunday afternoon when I discovered the first real crack. I was at the local grocery store picking up ingredients for dinner, thinking about nothing in particular. I saw Emily at the end of the aisle, laughing with a guy I didn't recognize. The laughter wasn't casual, it was intimate, familiar. I froze, unsure if I should approach or retreat, unsure if my eyes were deceiving me. Then I noticed the small, familiar gestures, the way her hand brushed his arm, the tilt of her head when she laughed. My stomach dropped, my thoughts scattered, and before I knew it, they were gone, without acknowledging me. I couldn't move at first. I stood there staring at the empty aisle, the sound of the automatic doors closing behind them ringing in my ears. I wanted to ask questions, to shout, to do anything, but my legs refused. I walked out, pretending to be calm, as if nothing had happened. At home, my phone buzzed. A message from Emily. I can't stop thinking about him. I don't know what to do. My heart sank. I didn't read it again. I couldn't. I didn't reply. That night, sleep didn't come. I wandered through my apartment, picking up random objects, putting them down again, unable to focus. The betrayal didn't feel like anger at first. It felt like a hollowing, a slow, silent emptying of everything I thought I knew. Days passed in a blur. I avoided friends. I stayed away from work parties and casual meetups. I kept my distance even from places I loved because every corner reminded me of her. The small coastal town suddenly felt like a cage, every familiar face a reminder of what I had lost. Then, one rainy afternoon, I ducked into the local library to escape the cold drizzle and the suffocating loneliness. I was sitting near the back, pretending to browse old books on local history, when I noticed her. Vanessa Brooks. She was sitting in a corner, laptop open, hair pulled back casually, and eyes that seemed to see everything. She had this quiet presence, not loud, not commanding, but deliberate. She noticed me noticing her, and for some reason, she smiled. It wasn't a flirtatious smile or a polite one. It was knowing, like she recognized a storm behind my eyes. I felt uncomfortable and drawn at the same time. I didn't know it then, but that moment would be the first step toward change. I didn't know she would become a subtle anchor in the chaos, or that she would challenge the way I viewed trust, betrayal, and my own worth. For now, I just stared at her from a few tables away, pretending to read about shipwrecks in our town, feeling the smallest flicker of hope in a life that felt hollowed out. I couldn't stop thinking about Vanessa after that first encounter at the library. There was something calm yet intense about her, a presence that made me aware of my own chaos. Over the next few days, I found excuses to return to the library. Not that I wanted to hide. I just wanted a quiet space where the world didn't demand explanations. She was always there, in the same corner, working on her laptop or reading. Sometimes she looked up, and our eyes met, lingering just long enough to make me conscious of my own solitude. On the third visit, fate, or maybe coincidence, pushed us together. A thunderstorm had rolled in, and the library emptied faster than usual. I was searching for a book near her table when she spoke first. "You look like someone who's carrying too much for no one to notice," she said, her voice calm, almost teasing. I paused, unsure how to respond. Most people would have avoided making such an observation about a stranger. But she wasn't most people. "Maybe I am," I said cautiously. "Or maybe you've just forgotten how to notice yourself," she countered. It was startling, how accurately she captured the dull ache I had been carrying. I didn't know whether to feel defensive or grateful. She didn't push me. She simply studied me with a quiet attentiveness that made it impossible to lie. "I'm Vanessa," she said, extending a hand. "Ryan," I replied, shaking it, feeling the strange warmth of acknowledgement I hadn't felt in weeks. That first conversation lasted less than 20 minutes. It wasn't heavy, didn't dive into my betrayal, didn't offer advice. It was observational, almost surgical in its precision. She asked questions that made me think, made me realize I had been ignoring my own feelings for far too long. Then she left, leaving her presence lingering like perfume, noticeable but not overbearing. Over the next few weeks, our meetings became routine. Not planned, but inevitable. We would find ourselves in the same aisles, the same corners of the library, sometimes sitting in silence, sometimes talking about books, small-town life, or fleeting memories. I slowly opened up, talking in vague terms about Emily without revealing too much. Vanessa listened without judgment, making subtle comments that nudged me toward clarity. She had a way of speaking that made me feel like I was rediscovering myself, piece by piece. Emily, meanwhile, continued her attempts to reclaim attention. She would message me, sometimes innocently, sometimes manipulatively, trying to elicit guilt or nostalgia. I ignored most of it. For the first time, silence felt like a weapon, subtle, deliberate, and infinitely powerful. Vanessa noticed every time I faltered, every time I considered replying. She never pressured me. She never scolded me. She simply reminded me, in her quiet way, that my decisions were my own. One evening, we ended up walking along the waterfront. The town's lights reflected on the water, creating streaks of gold and silver across the waves. Rain had passed, leaving the air sharp and salty. I admitted to her, for the first time, the depth of my confusion, the hollow ache that Emily's betrayal had left. She listened, nodding thoughtfully, never offering cliches or empty consolation. "You're afraid of being naive again," she said finally. I flinched. "Yes. How did you know?" She shrugged slightly. "People carry patterns. Some are easy to spot if you watch closely." Her insight surprised me, but it also offered clarity. I realized that my anger wasn't just about Emily. It was about losing trust in myself, about doubting my instincts. Vanessa wasn't there to punish or protect me. She was there to help me navigate my own recovery. By the time we parted that night, I knew something significant was happening. I wasn't just meeting someone new. I was rediscovering a version of myself I had ignored. And although attraction simmered beneath the surface, it wasn't immediate passion. It was awareness, curiosity, and the faint spark of possibility. It would be weeks before I fully realized how much Vanessa would change my perspective on betrayal, trust, and even revenge. For now, all I knew was that her presence made the small coastal town feel less like a cage and more like a space where I could breathe again. In the following days, Vanessa and I fell into a rhythm that neither of us acknowledged explicitly. There was no forced closeness, no push for intimacy, only a gradual awareness of each other's presence. We started to meet outside the library, at quiet cafes tucked away from the main street, or along the pier where the waves lapped lazily against the docks. The more time I spent with her, the more I noticed how different she was from Emily. Not just older and more experienced, but deliberate, grounded, and patient. Emily, on the other hand, continued her chaotic attempts to regain control. She would text at odd hours, tagging me in social media posts, dropping hints about her dating life, or reminding me of the good times we had. It was subtle, manipulative, and exhausting. In the past, I might have responded impulsively, but Vanessa had taught me to pause, to observe, and to let my choices define my reaction. One evening, after another long walk along the deserted beach, I admitted my frustration. "She's everywhere," I said, kicking at the sand. "I can't seem to escape her." Vanessa didn't reply immediately. She studied me, her eyes thoughtful. "You're not trying to escape her. You're reacting to her," she said finally. I stopped walking, letting the waves wash over my shoes. "There's a difference?" "Plenty," she replied. "Reacting is giving her power over your emotions. Escaping is reclaiming it." Her words hit me harder than I expected. I realized I had been giving Emily influence over my mood, my thoughts, my life. Even in betrayal, she had managed to define my responses. Vanessa's insight reframed everything. I wasn't powerless. I had simply forgotten that control was mine to reclaim. Over the next week, we started spending more time together intentionally. Not because I needed distraction from Emily, but because I found myself drawn to Vanessa's steadiness. We shared dinners, late-night coffees, and long conversations about life, regret, and personal growth. She never pried into my pain unnecessarily. She didn't pressure me to forgive or forget. Instead, She guided me toward understanding my own emotions, untangling anger from hurt, and clarity from confusion. It was during one of these late-night talks, in a small diner that overlooked the bay, that we discussed revenge. Not immediate, destructive revenge, but the type that feels inevitable and satisfying without causing chaos. I want her to understand what she's lost, I confessed quietly, staring at my untouched coffee. Vanessa leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. Then the question is, what does that look like without dragging yourself into negativity? I considered it. All my life, I'd associated revenge with confrontation, with exposing someone publicly, with making them hurt in the way I had. But Vanessa was teaching me a different approach, a way to demonstrate consequence through clarity, consistency, and reclaiming my narrative. The first step was internal, to stop reacting to Emily. Every post she made, every text, every attempt to provoke emotion was met with calm or silence. I began documenting things quietly, keeping records, writing down events in precise detail, observing instead of engaging. Vanessa guided me through this, emphasizing that the power wasn't in retaliation, but in restoring my own peace and integrity. One evening, as we walked home under the glow of streetlights reflecting on wet pavement from a light drizzle, I realized I wasn't just drawn to Vanessa. I was learning from her. I was starting to think strategically, to process betrayal rationally, and to reclaim agency over my own life. For the first time since discovering Emily's infidelity, I felt a sense of control. Not over her actions, not through dramatic confrontation, but over my own response. Vanessa hadn't replaced Emily. She hadn't fixed the past. She had shown me how to navigate the present, how to rebuild my sense of self, and how to approach justice, not with anger, but with measured clarity. By the end of that week, I began to see patterns in Emily's behavior that I hadn't noticed before: impulsiveness, neediness, self-centeredness. And with Vanessa's guidance, I recognized that the true revenge wasn't to humiliate her. It was to reclaim my narrative and move forward stronger, calmer, and wiser. Once I stopped reacting to Emily, something unexpected happened. I started seeing the past more clearly. Moments I had once brushed off as normal relationship issues began to line up into a pattern I could no longer ignore. The missed calls she blamed on work, the sudden need for privacy, the way she framed my concerns as insecurity instead of addressing them. None of it had been accidental. Vanessa didn't point these things out directly. She let me arrive at them myself. One afternoon, we sat at a quiet cafe overlooking the water. The place smelled like roasted coffee beans and sea air, and for the first time in weeks, my chest didn't feel tight. I told her about one of Emily's recent messages, how she'd accused me of being cold, distant, changed. Vanessa raised an eyebrow. Changed how? She says I'm not the guy she fell in love with. Vanessa smiled slightly. People say that when the version of you they could control stops existing. That sentence stayed with me. Emily escalated her behavior soon after. She started showing up where she knew I'd be: local bars, community events, even the gym. She never confronted me directly. Instead, she made sure I noticed her. Laughing too loudly. Posting pictures clearly designed to provoke jealousy. Acting unbothered while watching my reactions out of the corner of her eye. I didn't give her one. Vanessa explained it simply. When someone feeds on attention, indifference feels like abandonment. That indifference didn't come naturally. There were nights I wanted to respond, to confront, to ask questions I already knew the answers to. But Vanessa reminded me that clarity doesn't come from confrontation. It comes from consistency. As weeks passed, my connection with Vanessa deepened, not explosively, but steadily. There was attraction, undeniable but restrained. We didn't rush physical intimacy. Instead, we built something far more dangerous to the past version of me: self-respect. One night, while walking along the pier under a sky heavy with clouds, Vanessa finally shared a fragment of her own story. I stayed too long once, she said quietly, because I thought loyalty meant endurance. I looked at her, surprised by the vulnerability in her voice. It doesn't, she continued. Loyalty without honesty is just self-abandonment. That was when I realized how much she wasn't just helping me out of a breakup. She was reshaping how I understood relationships entirely. Emily made her biggest mistake shortly after. She posted a long, emotional story online about betrayal. Hers, according to her narrative. She didn't name me, but anyone in town could read between the lines. She painted herself as blindsided, devoted, discarded. The comments flooded in with sympathy. I felt the old anger flare. Vanessa read the post once, then handed the phone back to me. She wants a reaction, she said. The question is, do you want closure or do you want clarity? What's the difference? I asked. Closure soothes emotions, she replied. Clarity changes outcomes. That night, I didn't respond. I didn't post. I didn't explain. I waited. Because for the first time, I understood that timing, not impulse, was power. Waiting was harder than acting. Every instinct in me wanted to correct the narrative immediately, to defend myself before her version of events settled into something permanent. But Vanessa was right. Clarity needed patience, not urgency. Over the next few days, I noticed small shifts. People who used to greet Emily enthusiastically started acting cautious. Conversations paused when she entered a room. Sympathy hadn't disappeared, but curiosity had crept in. In a small coastal town, curiosity is dangerous. It asks questions people don't want to answer. Emily messaged me late one night. Why are you letting people believe lies about me? I stared at the screen for a long time. The irony was almost impressive. I didn't reply. Vanessa and I met the next morning for a walk along the shoreline. The tide was low, exposing dark rocks and wet sand that reflected the gray sky above. I told her about the message. She's panicking, Vanessa said calmly. People who are secure don't chase validation. So what do? I asked. You tell the truth, she said. Once. Cleanly. Without anger. That afternoon, I sat at my kitchen table and wrote everything down, not emotionally, not defensively, but factually. Dates. Moments. Messages. I wasn't trying to embarrass Emily. I was documenting reality. When I finished, I didn't feel relief. I felt steady. Before posting anything, I showed it to Vanessa. She read it slowly, carefully. This doesn't sound like revenge, she said. It sounds like ownership. That night, I posted a short statement online. No accusations. No insults. Just a clear timeline of events and a single sentence at the end. I didn't leave because I stopped caring. I left because honesty stopped existing. I turned off notifications and went to sleep. By morning, the response was different from what I expected. No cheering. No attacks. Just quiet acknowledgement. People messaged privately, asking questions, offering apologies for assuming things. A few admitted they'd suspected something wasn't right, but didn't know how to say it. Emily tried to respond. Her comment was long, emotional, scattered. It contradicted itself. She deleted it within an hour. Vanessa didn't celebrate when I told her. She simply nodded. Truth doesn't need applause, she said. It just needs space. Days passed. Emily withdrew. Her posts slowed. Her appearances became rare. When I did see her around town, she avoided eye contact. The power dynamic had shifted, not through confrontation, but through consistency. My relationship with Vanessa continued to evolve quietly. One evening, sitting on her couch, our conversation drifted into silence. It wasn't awkward. It was comfortable. When she leaned her head against my shoulder, it felt intentional, chosen, not reactive. This only works, she said softly, if it's not about her anymore. I know, I replied. And I meant it. That was the moment I understood something important. Revenge had never been the goal. Reclaiming my identity was. Emily had lost control not because I punished her, but because I refused to participate in the distortion she needed to survive. And with Vanessa, I wasn't escaping pain. I was building clarity. For the first time in months, I felt present. Not haunted by the past. Not anxious about the future. Just grounded in the knowledge that I had handled betrayal without becoming someone I didn't recognize. And that felt like the real victory. Once the noise settled, something unfamiliar filled the space it left behind. Quiet. Not the uncomfortable kind that begs to be distracted, but a calm that allowed thoughts to finish themselves. I didn't realize how much emotional static I'd been living with until it was gone. Emily faded from my daily awareness faster than I expected. Not because she stopped existing in town, but because she stopped occupying space in my head. That difference mattered. Vanessa noticed it before I did. You're lighter, she said one evening as we cooked dinner together at her place. Not happier, just lighter. I thought about it. I'm not bracing myself anymore. She smiled. That's what safety feels like. That word, safety, had never been something I associated with attraction. Passion, excitement, intensity, sure. But safety? That felt almost too calm to be real. And yet, there it was, simmering between us as naturally as the food on the stove. Our relationship shifted that night, subtly but unmistakably. We didn't make any grand declarations. No labels. No dramatic turning points. Just a shared understanding that what we were building was intentional. Later, sitting on her porch with a glass of wine, Vanessa asked me a question that caught me off guard. "Do you think you ignored the red flags?" she said. "Or did you explain them away?" I answered honestly. I explained them away because facing them meant admitting I'd chosen wrong. She nodded. Most people don't fear betrayal. They fear being wrong about who they trusted. That hit deeper than I expected. A few days later, I ran into Emily unexpectedly at the grocery store. No warning. No preparation. She stood at the end of an aisle, frozen, like she wasn't sure whether to walk away or confront me. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then she approached. "You look different," she said. "So do you." There was an awkward pause. No hostility. No tension. Just two people standing in the aftermath of something neither of us could undo. "I never meant for things to get like that," she said quietly. I believed her, and for the first time, that belief didn't require forgiveness. "I know," I replied, "but intention doesn't change impact." She nodded slowly, as if processing that sentence in real time. We parted without drama. No closure speech. No apology tour. Just an ending that felt complete because it wasn't forced. When I told Vanessa about the encounter, she listened carefully. "How did it feel?" she asked. "Neutral," I said after thinking about it. "And I think that's the point." She reached for my hand. That's emotional independence. As weeks passed, Vanessa and I grew closer, not through constant contact, but through consistency. We supported each other's routines. We respected boundaries. We talked about uncomfortable things without turning them into fights. It was unfamiliar, but grounding. One night, lying beside her, I asked, "Do you ever worry about the age difference?" She didn't answer immediately. "I worry more about emotional mismatches," she said finally. "Age just changes how fast you recognize them." That was when it clicked. She wasn't ahead of me because of time. She was ahead because she'd already paid the price of learning certain lessons the hard way. And now, I was learning them without having to lose myself. Emily had been the catalyst. Vanessa was the clarity. But the real transformation came from choosing not to repeat the same patterns with different faces. For the first time, I wasn't building a relationship out of fear of being alone. I was building it out of respect, for myself, and for the woman who showed me what that actually looked like. As summer edged closer to fall, the town changed in subtle ways. Tourists thinned out, evenings grew quieter, and routines became more visible. In a place this small, patterns are easy to notice and harder to escape. But for once, I wasn't trying to outrun anything. Vanessa and I settled into something that felt real in the most unromantic way possible. Grocery runs, shared playlists, mornings where we worked side by side in silence. There was no performance, no need to impress. And that, more than anything, felt intimate. One evening, while we sat on the hood of my car watching the sun dip behind the water, Vanessa said something that lingered. "People think revenge looks loud," she said. "But the most effective kind is quiet evolution." I knew what she meant. Emily had noticed the changes, even if she didn't fully understand them. I could see it in the way she watched from a distance at town events. Not with anger, but confusion. I had become unpredictable to her because I was no longer reacting. That confusion reached its peak during the annual fall festival. Everyone showed up. There was music, food trucks, cheap lights strung between lampposts. Vanessa and I didn't attend together. We arrived separately, intentionally. No announcements. No statements. At some point during the night, our paths crossed naturally. She smiled, took my hand briefly, then let go. A simple gesture. But in a town that remembers everything, it spoke volumes. I noticed Emily watching from across the square. Later that night, she approached Vanessa. I didn't hear the conversation, but I saw enough. Emily's posture was defensive. Vanessa's was calm, open. No crossed arms. No raised voice. Just steady presence. When they finished talking, Emily walked away quickly. Vanessa joined me a moment later. She wanted to know if this was real, she said. And I asked. I told her it wasn't about her, Vanessa replied. And that seemed to bother her more than anything else. That was the moment I understood the final shift. Emily didn't lose me to another woman. She lost access to the version of me that needed her validation. After the festival, rumors started, but they didn't sting. If anything, they fizzled out faster than expected. There was nothing dramatic to latch onto. No scandal. No visible resentment. Just two people moving forward without asking permission. A few nights later, Vanessa and I finally had the conversation we'd been circling for weeks. "What are we doing?" I asked. She didn't hesitate. "We're choosing each other. Slowly. On purpose. No promises of forever. No pressure to define the future. Just clarity. And that clarity came with responsibility. I found myself more aware of my own behavior. More honest when something bothered me. More willing to pause instead of react. Vanessa expected that. Not perfection, but awareness. Emily stopped appearing altogether not long after. Word around town was that she'd accepted a job a few hours away. When I heard, I didn't feel triumph. I felt closure, not because she left, but because her leaving no longer felt necessary for my peace. Vanessa noticed my reaction when I told her. "You didn't smile," she said. "I didn't need to," I replied. She nodded. "That's how you know it's over." Looking back, the revenge wasn't a plan. It was a byproduct. The consequence of growth colliding with someone who refused to evolve. I hadn't won because Emily lost. I'd won because I stopped playing the game entirely. With Emily gone, the town felt smaller and quieter. Not emptier, just settled. It was strange how someone could take up so much emotional space without realizing it, and how quickly that space could become neutral once they were removed from your daily orbit. Vanessa and I didn't talk about Emily anymore. Not because it was forbidden, but because she simply stopped being relevant. Our conversations turned toward plans, values, the things people usually avoid discussing until they're already emotionally invested. One night, while sitting at the kitchen table with takeout containers between us, Vanessa asked, "What scares you about us?" I didn't answer right away. "That I'll bring old habits into something new," I said finally. "That I'll confuse peace with boredom and ruin it." She considered that. "Then we agree to check in before that happens." That was new for me. Problems addressed before they became damage. As weeks passed, the age difference surfaced in quiet ways. Vanessa was more deliberate, more patient. She didn't rush decisions or emotions. I realized how often I'd mistaken intensity for intimacy in the past. With her, intimacy was consistency. Then something unexpected happened. Emily emailed me. Not a message, not a text. An email. Long structured. Thought out. She apologized. Not for the betrayal, but for how she handled the aftermath. For the manipulation. The public narrative. The attempts to provoke reactions. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She didn't ask to meet. She simply acknowledged the harm. I read it twice. When I told Vanessa, she didn't react emotionally. "Do you feel like responding?" she asked. "No," I said. "But I don't feel angry either." "That's a good place to be," she replied. I archived the email. That night, something shifted between Vanessa and me, not forward, but deeper. We talked about past failures, not as wounds, but as data. Patterns recognized. Lessons integrated. I realized then that what we were doing was intentional in a way my previous relationship never had been. We weren't just attracted, we were aligned. At a local charity event a few days later, someone asked casually how long we'd been together. Vanessa looked at me before answering. "Long enough to know we're not rushing," she said. That answer stayed with me. Later, walking home under streetlights, I said, "You didn't have to include me in that answer." She smiled. I wanted to. There was power in that choice. The town continued its rhythm, unchanged, indifferent. And that indifference felt liberating. Our relationship wasn't fuel for gossip anymore. It was just ours. I started thinking less about what I'd lost and more about what I was building. Not in grand gestures, but in small, repeatable decisions. Trust, communication, boundaries. Emily had once been the center of my emotional world. Now she was a closed chapter, not because I forced it shut, but because I stopped rereading it. Vanessa wasn't my rebound. She was my recalibration. And for the first time, I understood that revenge didn't require damage. It required distance, discipline, and the willingness to become someone the past could no longer reach. By the time winter settled in, everything felt quieter, not just around town, but inside me. The urgency that once drove my decisions was gone. I wasn't chasing outcomes anymore. I was living inside choices I'd already made. Vanessa and I spent more time indoors, the kind of time that reveals who someone really is. Snowy evenings, slow mornings, conversations that wandered without needing a destination. There was no pressure to entertain each other. Silence wasn't a threat, it was a shared space. One night, while we sat wrapped in blankets watching the snow fall outside her window, Vanessa said, "You know this isn't just a phase, right?" "I do," I replied. "That's what makes it different." She nodded. "Good. Because I don't do temporary anymore." That wasn't a warning. It was a boundary. And instead of feeling confined by it, I felt trusted. Around that time, I ran into someone who used to be close friends with Emily. We talked casually, politely. Before leaving, she hesitated. "I owe you an apology," she said. "We believed things we shouldn't have." I thanked her genuinely. After she walked away, I realized something important. I no longer needed validation from people who hadn't been there when it mattered. Their opinions had lost their weight. When I told Vanessa about the encounter, she smiled slightly. "That's growth," she said. "When apologies feel unnecessary, but still welcome." The town had fully moved on by then. New gossip, new drama, new stories to recycle. My name rarely came up anymore, and when it did, it wasn't tied to Emily. It was tied to work, to friendships, to stability. That stability scared me more than chaos ever had. I admitted that to Vanessa one evening. "Peace can feel unfamiliar," she said, "especially if you learned love through turbulence." She was right. I had mistaken emotional volatility for depth for years. With her, depth showed up differently, in accountability, in patience, in the willingness to pause instead of escalate. A week before the holidays, Vanessa invited me to join her for a small gathering with friends. Not a big step socially, but emotionally, it felt significant. These were people who knew her history, who had seen her fail, recover, rebuild. I was nervous. Later that night, as we drove home, she reached for my hand. "You did fine," she said. "I wasn't trying to impress anyone," I replied. "That's why you did," she said. That moment stayed with me. Emily crossed my mind less and less, until one day I realized she hadn't crossed it at all. Not even in passing. Not even as a reference point. And that's when it hit me. The revenge arc had ended quietly, without a finale. Not because justice was served, but because the story no longer needed an antagonist. What I had with Vanessa wasn't built on contrast. It wasn't better than before. It was simply right now, and honest, and grounded. And for the first time, that felt like enough. The realization came quietly, the way most real endings do. It was an ordinary morning. Gray light through the curtains. Coffee brewing in the kitchen. Vanessa moving around the apartment with a familiarity that no longer felt new, but didn't feel dull either. It felt earned. I watched her for a moment and understood something I hadn't been able to put into words before. I wasn't healing anymore. I was living. That distinction mattered. Over the past months, I told this story to myself as one of betrayal and recovery. But standing there, I saw it differently. The betrayal had been the inciting incident, not the plot. Everything that followed, the restraint, the growth, the clarity, had been about learning how not to abandon myself again. Vanessa noticed me staring. "What?" she asked. "Nothing," I said. "Just realizing how normal this feels." She smiled. Normal is underrated. Later that day, we took a walk through town. Same streets where I'd once felt exposed, judged, small. Now they felt neutral, familiar, almost irrelevant. The town hadn't changed. I had. We passed the cafe where I'd once obsessed over Emily's messages. The pier where anger had kept me awake at night. The festival square where power had shifted without a word being spoken. None of it held charge anymore. At the edge of town, Vanessa stopped and turned to me. "You know," she said, "people think revenge is about balance. Pain for pain." I nodded. "But real balance," she continued, "comes when you stop needing the scale." That was it. That was the final lesson. Emily didn't know me anything. I didn't know her silence, anger, or forgiveness. What I owed myself was honesty, and I'd finally paid that debt. Later that evening, sitting together in quiet companionship, I thought about how this story would sound if I told it to someone else. Not dramatic, not explosive, just deliberate. A man gets betrayed. He chooses not to become bitter. He meets someone who challenges him to grow instead of react. And together, they build something that doesn't need to prove itself to anyone. That was the ending. Not a victory parade. Not poetic justice. Just a life that no longer revolved around someone else's choices. If you'd asked me months ago what revenge looked like, I would have described consequences. Now I describe freedom. Because the most satisfying ending isn't when the person who hurt you loses. It's when their absence stops mattering at all. And that's when you know the story is truly over.